Well, the many battles in the war in Ukraine are not just happening on the ground or in the air, they're also happening on the internet. Ukrainians have been fighting hard to stop misinformation about the war from spreading on social media. For some analysis of this now, we want to bring in Dmytro Zolotuhin. He is a former Deputy Minister of Information Policy in Ukraine. Thank you so much for joining us. I find this aspect of the war incredibly fascinating because we know Vladimir Putin has been trying very hard to cast a narrative that he's come into Ukraine to save Russians, to fight Nazis. And the only place where this narrative seems to be flying is within Russia. And so I see it as there's sort of like two levels of resistance. There are people online kind of actively fighting Putin's narrative, but then they're also doing other things. They are identifying Russian positions, where Russian tanks may be, verifying the location, putting all that information on the internet. So I want to ask you, can you explain just how, Ukraine has been so successful at fighting the disinformation?
Hello, and thank you for having me. Well, the answer is very clear and understandable, just because we are in a war for the last 7+ years. And if you're fighting for 7 years, you have to evolve and you have to figure out how you can defend yourself and find a way how to explain to the rest of the world how to help and how to support Ukraine in terms of fighting with much more bigger and much more powerful enemy in online and in information sphere, as well as offline and as well as on the ground. So now the basic directions of the work, and I can tell you that it's not only government, it's like thousands and thousands of volunteers all over the internet, not only in Ukraine. I know about the teams in Great Britain, in US, in Europe, even in New Zealand and in Australia. They are working on the open source intelligence. And there are some very curious and absolutely interesting and gorgeous results about this. For example, I heard about the British and Israeli companies who intercepted the broadcasting of Russian soldiers' radio on Ukrainian soil. And these soldiers are talking about what a nightmare they're having with Ukrainian army when they invaded. And this shows that still you remember the selfie soldiers phenomena when Russian soldiers in Donbass since 2014 and 15, they posted tons and tons of selfies online on VKontakte and on Facebook, on Instagram, showing where they are and showing what they're doing. So now it's much more complicated, but they still miss a lot of, and they still post a lot of information online, more sophisticatedly, but that volunteers also evolving, and they capturing all this stuff. And second big direction is, of course, communication from Ukraine and from other countries of the world, which is directed on basic three audiences. First is, of course, Ukrainians. And I can tell you that the situation of the information space in Ukraine totally differs from the 2014, when I was also a volunteer for Information Analytical Center of the National Security and Defense Council. And people really very strong about accepting information, about not believing to each message in chats, in messengers, but instead of that, they helping one another also, not only with their hands, not only with money, but people also supporting and saying others how to behave yourself in the chats. Not to spread information about the movements of Ukrainian army, not to spread information about the bombs where they shelling and where they making big problems, just not to give the information to the enemy, because it's also online and they also working against us, searching for information and stuff. Second big direction is delivery of the facts and of the arguments to the Russian information space, to the Russian communities, saying that we don't want to kill your sons and husbands, so please take them away from here. and thousands of people now working to deliver this stuff, the photos and videos to the Russian segments of social media, and we have succeeded because Russian Federation has blocked Facebook, Instagram, and very, very many other online sources.
So,
and
Dmytro,
third is, of course,
sorry.
Yes.
So let me ask you about Russia's claims with regards to Ukraine's nuclear capabilities. Maybe most people may not be aware that during and after the collapse of the former Soviet Union, Ukraine had some 1,400, 1,700 nuclear warheads. But as part of the Budapest Memorandum in 1994, they agreed to get rid of those nuclear weapons in return for Russia respecting its sovereignty, its borders. What are you hearing about what Russia is claiming about Ukraine's nuclear capabilities?
As far as I know, Sergei Naryshkin, who is the head of Foreign Intelligence Service of Russian Federation, is personally responsible for doing this project. So he is seeking for the information and how to distort it, how to form and assure the audience in Russia to send a message that Ukraine was prepared to create nuclear weapons and was prepared to maybe even to use it, which is totally ridiculous concept because except of Budapest Memorandum, well, I can tell you because me myself, I was also working on the export control and non-proliferation efforts in Ukraine, and I know the system from the inside, how Ukraine is participating in different agreements and platforms, international documents, except of Budapest Memorandum. For example, the agreement on the non-proliferation of the nuclear weapons and stuff, which were also adopted in Ukraine back in 1994. So speaking about the nuclear weapons, it's not only Budapest Memorandum, it's also various platforms of Ukrainian participation in different international processes. And speaking of it, we have to realize that firstly, Ukraine is not capable physically to restore the production of the nuclear weapons because we still do not have enough of the nuclear fuel, if I may say. So the very sophisticated and difficult chemical elements that had to be produced before the next step. Second is that various international platforms like MAGATE and also different international commissions, they are constantly on the issues of monitoring of things in Ukraine. Because as I know, export control and non-proliferation system in Ukraine was made back in the first part of the 90s, again with the great participation of the United States administration, which we are thankful for. And this is why it leads me to the thought that it's just physically not it's not possible, which Sergei Naryshkin is trying to create and which he trying to send the message about this.
Dmytro,
in line with that, we have, yeah.
I want to ask you about something else. From nuclear weapons now to the nuclear power plants. There are a number of them, a lot of them in Ukraine. We know that Russia has managed to take over one after some shelling. What have you heard about whether or not that power plant, that nuclear plant, was deliberately targeted by Russia? And are you concerned that Russia will target other plants?
Unfortunately, yes, this is absolutely another situation because we know that we cannot control this stuff because Russian soldiers around nuclear plants in Ukraine is like the monkeys with the grenades. So we do not know what stuff they will plan to do instead. We have the biggest in Europe, South Ukrainian nuclear plant, which has about 14 blocks, of which, as far as I know today, one is still working. Others are in as I may say, in quiet regime, and Ukrainian teams of administrators is working on the plant still with the communication on the Russian soldiers also standing there and like making some pressure on the team on the ground. Together with this, now in Russian Telegram channels, because what I monitor about 500 of Russian Telegram channels, also part of them is dedicated for the spreading of information from the Russian intelligence services. They started to write about some military subdivisions that were specifically brought to Ukrainian soil. For example, this is first mobile brigade of the radiological, biological, and chemical defense, which situated in Saratov region in Saratov region regiment. And I think that you might know about this because this is the polygon in Shikhani in Saratov region, which also was used to creation of the Novichok poison, which was used in British Salisbury and for the poisoning of Navalny. So this is actually the same guys. As far as I know from these open sources that I'm trying to verify now, people from this first mobile brigade, they were brought to Crimea far before the start of invasion, which took place February 24th. So they were there in the first part of February, and now they might be in a region of the South Ukrainian nuclear plant. And please don't forget about also this issues around the Chernobyl nuclear plant, which is also it's a shelter. It's not operating now, but we still have to be sure that the shelter, that the defense of the plant is operated and is working, and it's not damaged by any shelling or
I think that is what
anything.
I think that is what the whole world is.
It's specifically, yes.
Yeah, I think, Dmytro, that the whole world is hoping for the very same, that these plants are not damaged by Russian attacks. Dmytro Zolotuhin, thank you very much, sir, for some time. We really appreciate your insight.
Thank you.